Hello, and welcome to our webinar, A Publishing Accord for Global Audience. I'm Julia Smith, Senior Editor, Books for Youth at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions and pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Also, Booklist will now be offering closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned above. From there, you can select show or hide subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting subtitle settings. Last but not least, links to today's slides and title list were included in the reminder email sent to you from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the link located there. You can also download the slides and title list by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. Today, Norton Young Readers will be introducing Accord Literary, a new publishing initiative that unites young readers with contemporary voices in fiction across the African continent. We'll have an opportunity to hear from some of the amazing authors involved in this partnership a little later in the presentation, but let's begin by meeting the publishers involved: Simon Boughton, Deborah Ahenkorah, and Sarah Odedina. Let's get everyone up here. Very good. Let me give you a little introduction to each of these wonderful people. Simon Boughton joined W.W. Norton and Company in 2018 to develop a new children's and young adult publishing program, Norton Young Readers. One of the Norton Young Readers' first books, Free Lunch by Rex Ogle, won 2020 YALSA Excellence in Nonfiction Award. Previously, he held positions at the Macmillan Children's Publishing Group, Roaring Brook Press, Random House Children's Books, Simon & Schuster Books for Young Readers, and Kingfisher Books. Deborah Ahenkorah has built and led several organizations, all of whose goals have been to give children across Africa culturally relevant books to fall in love with. Her publishing house, African Bureau Stories, is committed to providing increased opportunities for African writers and illustrators to publish locally and internationally. Deborah also established the Golden Baobab Prize, the prestigious literary award, which over the past 10 years has discovered and supported children's book authors and illustrators across Africa. Deborah is a graduate of Bryn Mawr College and lives in Accra with her family. Sarah Odedina has worked in publishing for more than 2 decades. As publishing director of children's lists of Bloomsbury Publishing, she oversaw the publication of the Harry Potter series, as well as published many other best-selling prize-winning novels and picture books. Sarah is now editor-at-large for Pushkin Press, commissioning titles for the children's and YA list. She is the co-founder of Scoop Magazine for children, and she sees her work as a publisher and as a director of Accord as an opportunity to bring African writers telling their stories of life on the continent to readers worldwide. Thank you so much for joining us today, Simon, Deborah, and Sarah.
Thank you.
There we go. So nice to see you all. Let's just start with a little bit of background on Accord. Can you explain to all of us here sort of the idea and the goals behind this partnership and sort of what your past experience brought you to this point and why you felt the need to create this venture?
Awesome, I can start, Sarah.
Yeah, go on, Debbie. You start.
Yeah.
So yeah, Accord is basically an agency, a literary agency, but beyond labels, what we are and what we are looking to achieve is to find incredible voices, incredible stories from across the African continent and share them with readers across Africa and around the world. We have a firm belief in, I think, two core things. One is that there is an abundance of talent. What there isn't an abundance of on the continent when it comes to literature is an abundance of opportunity and an abundance of mentorship and support. And that's basically, those are the two things that Accord does. We offer support and mentorship to guide our authors through the publishing process and until they find a home for their books. And then we also help them to find that. So that, I think that would be the summary. I don't know if I left anything out there.
No, I don't think so. And I think the real energy for the project came when Deborah and I spent some time together in Accra during a literary festival, when it was so abundantly clear to me, as my first visit to Accra, that there's a huge number of people wanting to write for young readers. And there's a great need for information and support and guidance. And saying I've been working in publishing for 2 decades, I think you could probably almost add a decade to that. So I've got, I have a lot of experience of working with editors and nurturing writers and bringing stories to life. I'm also particularly committed as a reader and as an editor to hearing voices from around the world. And it seemed to me that I didn't get to see many African writers presenting their work to me for potential publication. And in a way, the accord between Debbie and I, the creation of this agency, is a means of allowing writers to get their voices out into the world with the guidance of 2 professional people who've been working in publishing for quite a long time and have a lot of information between us. So we're kind of, we're holding doors open for people, I think, trying to make it possible to get out into an international market, as well as to strengthen, as Debbie said, very importantly, strengthen the publishing scene within Africa to make books available for young readers on the continent who need more stories that reflect their lives. There's just a call for more writers for all of those readers.
So is, just so that I'm clear and our audience, is Accord also publishing the books for audiences in Africa too? So in other languages for distribution in Africa, as well as the international audience, so where we would be getting them for the libraries?
Yeah, our commitment is to reach children across the continent, the African continent, and then children globally. How we do it is a work in progress. I think what we're figuring out now is the core of identifying our writers, giving the support that's necessary, holding open the doors. At the moment, we think our role is best suited to opening the doors and finding the right partnerships. So in my other job beyond Accord, I'm a publisher with a publishing house here. So we have those opportunities to publish the Accord books in Ghana through me, as well as through the other African publishers that we are speaking to. Ultimately, if we're finding great stories, great readers, we don't see a reason why any child at all should be held back. And within the parameters of what's possible, our goal is to connect these stories to as many readers as we can.
Fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about the scope of this program. Sort of the number of books and the range of genres, and even the voices that are going to be represented.
Debbie, shall I?
Yeah, go for it, Sarah.
Well, the range of titles and the range of genres is as wide as the world and as wide as people's imaginations. It's infinite. So we have everything from social commentary through historical into very wonderful world-building high fantasy, because African writers aren't restrained, constrained, by anything in terms of the limits of their imagination. Our focus is very much on fiction. We're not working with writers working on picture books. We've decided, partly because of the volume of people that we're talking with, that it would be much more concentrating to concentrate on fiction. So it's middle grade teen YA. We're open to submissions all the time to African writers, and we do a lot of workshops. We were doing them in person before the pandemic, and since the pandemic, we've been doing them online. So people know that we exist, and they send us their projects. And I think we probably see 20 or 30 submissions a week. So we see a lot, and we see some absolutely wonderful things, and things that are just, you need the support to blossom. So there's no limit on what we expect to read and enjoy from African writers.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we are excited to do is expand all of our expectations and definitions of what African is or can be, or what African stories should represent. So I think for us, a big part of our commitment in terms of getting these stories out are to just open people's minds to what the continent is and what its stories are. And I think, allowing genres and the types of stories we are looking for to have no limit enables us to achieve that.
Absolutely. It's, I think that traditionally in the past, there has been expectations of what African writers can write about. And I think sitting with us today are three authors who prove that actually there's anything available to African writers to write about, because it's all there in people's imaginations. And it's wonderful to know that we are not reinforcing a stereotype of what's acceptable in terms of African literature. We're allowing African writers to speak and voice their own ideas and creativity.
I think that's so important. And you hear a lot of talk these days, and it's a very good reminder that it's gaining traction too, about whenever you're representing a group, and often here it comes out of conversations for marginalized groups. But the idea that any of them are not a monolith. And I think the things you're saying are really touching on that.
Absolutely. It's really important to remember that. It's one continent, but it's 54, some people say 55 countries. And within that, there's many, many languages, dozens of different, really profoundly different cultural groups. It's not one, Africa is not a country, it's a continent, and it's got many countries and many, many different people inside it.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, particularly because of the audience we're speaking to today, it might be necessary context to maybe highlight why this work is so important, and maybe why we haven't seen voices like Elizabeth-Irene, Ruby's, and Patrick's in abundance to date in the genre, in not genre, but like age range that we're focusing in. Traditionally, across Africa, because of various historical contexts, a lot of our literature is imported. So what that means is that opportunities that writers should have to be able to create their work aren't there, because we consume a lot of literature from abroad. So when those opportunities don't exist, it means that there isn't an economy that's being developed around publishing. And that means just that the opportunities will not be there, the opportunities to train, the opportunities to work with editors, the opportunities to make almost a career of publishing, a career of writing, to the degree with which you can do it. So what our court is doing really is opening that door. And I saw a question that, why aren't we doing picture books? Why aren't we doing nonfiction? Because the scope of work to do to open the door is so vast that we have to pick and choose, right? And in picking and choosing where we have, it's not just being a traditional agent, it's also having a writing program, it's also offering the mentorship, it's also offering the career advice, right? Because this is a this is a whole new world of being able to publish internationally as an African publisher for a lot of the authors that we will work with. So it's really, it's almost, you know, groundbreaking in some sense. And, you know, kudos to Norton really for seeing the vision in a partnership like this. And I think one of the things we hope to achieve today is to really get people excited about this door that has been open, and to ensure that, you know, once the door is open, you know, readers, librarians, bookkeepers to the industry can see the importance of a project like this and really champion it, so that this doesn't become just like something that happened before, but it becomes the norm, where readers in classrooms and in homes across America are falling in love with African characters in the same way that readers across Africa are falling in love with American characters. That's the world we are hoping to create, and we're hoping that conversations like this enable us to build allies to make that happen.
Yeah, thank you.
What is it that you're looking for in the books that you're publishing under the Accord name?
Well, we're not publishing. We're publishing under the Norton name, of course, not under the Accord name. Under the Accord name, we're mentoring and editing and supporting. And what we're looking for always is a strong voice and an original idea, and the energy and determination to make that absolutely the best it can be. And we're not at all prescriptive about whether it's humorous or historical or social issues or fantasy. It's really about the writer's voice. And I think if we look at strong children's books the world over, the books that last, the books that really engage people's hearts and souls the most, are those that have a really committed author with a very strong and original and unique voice. And that's what we're looking for. And I think that's what we're finding.
And I would say, you know, the word Accord is on the title page of the book, right above the Norton imprint. So of all the books. So we are carrying that name and that sense of mission and purpose into the publishing program, and giving our customers and our audience a way to just identify these books, to associate that sense of, mission and enterprise with these books. So yes, they're Norton, but they have Accord on the title page just above our little seagull. So that will be there too.
We're delighted.
Yeah, totally.
And I think I would perhaps add for us, what this does, I'm sort of listening to this conversation from the other side, and to sort of turn it around a little bit. As a US publisher, foreign markets can be very inaccessible. We recognize it's one thing to have a mission, but there's practicalities here. There's access to the market, there's access to authors, there's sort of those local relationships. And the great opportunity for us as a US-based publisher, and the reason we're so excited about this partnership and sort of have embraced it, is it's Deborah and Sarah and their kind of expertise and connections. It's a wonderful opportunity for us at a distance in New York to find, just as I think the mission of Accord is to find a pathway into international markets, we're finding a pathway to an international authorship that is a challenge for us. It's so from my point of view, this is looking at from the other end of the road, so to speak. It's a really extraordinary opportunity. There's a huge amount of interest, as somebody said earlier, in bringing as many voices into the world of children's literature in the US as possible. I think we're in a moment right now where that thirst for diverse voices and new voices and fresh points of view is more present than ever. And what I love about this program is that it isn't us reaching out, it's us opening a door, and welcoming voices in. So it's a unique opportunity. As has been said, Africa's not monolithic. It's a very complex and diverse set of different cultures, and so for us, is this really opens a door too.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. I think that this brings us neatly into the end of our very first segment. So thank you so much for introducing us to sort of the ideas going behind this publishing program. And we are going to move now into the author Q&A portion. And I will begin that by welcoming Elizabeth-Irene Baitie to the stage with me. And let me give you a little background on her as a writer. She is a Ghanaian children's book author, and her new middle grade novel, Crossing the Stream, is being published by Norton Young Readers in June 2021. She has won the Burt Award for African Young Adult Literature, along with the Macmillan Writers Prize for Africa. She lives in Accra with her husband and children. Thanks for being here, Elizabeth-Irene.
Thank you, Julia. It's lovely to be here.
Why don't you just take a couple of minutes here to let everyone know about your new book and what they can be looking forward to?
Well, my book is Crossing the Stream, and my main character is 12-year-old Ato. Ato's father died when he was a baby, and he lives with his mom, who is a little nervous, a little anxious, a little fearful as a result of things that have gone on in the past. Now, inexplicably, Ato's mother asked him to spend weekends with his grandmother. This comes as a surprise to Ato because his grandmother is somebody that he knows his mother is afraid of and is suspicious of. Now, Ato's main goal in the story is to work on an eco project with his friends in order to gain entry into this fantastic bird paradise called Noma. And Noma is extra special for Ato because his father, who is dead, helped to build it. Now, in the course of developing their project, a number of problems arise, big problems, including poisoning in the community. And Ato and his friends become involved in trying to find out what is going on. This brings them head to head with a very influential man in the community, the Prophet of Fire, whom Ato's mother literally adores. Ato begins to think there's something wrong, but he's young, and very often, particularly in our cultures, when you're young, you're respectful, you keep your distance from older people, you do not question them, and Ato really begins to think that there's something wrong. Now, his grandmother, who he spends time with, is very positive, very nurturing, very influential in increasing Ato's self-confidence and his sense of personal strength. She has a couch in her house that his mother has warned him never, ever to sit on. He becomes so close to his grandmother that after a few visits where he avoids the couch, he finds himself sitting on the couch with his grandmother, sharing stories. She shares stories about the past, his father who is dead. And this interaction builds so much strength into Ato that he finally has the courage to face this influential man in the community. And we'll find out how this man is related to the poisoning going on in the community. But largely, it's a story about the relationship between a young boy growing up in an atmosphere of fear and a warm and strong and loving person who has a positive influence on his life as a result of their relationship.
Thank you so much. All right, so let's dig in a little bit more for what's going on here. Environmentalism is one of the main themes in this book. Is that an issue that you think will connect with young readers?
Yes, I absolutely do. In this story, the children are building an eco project in order to gain entry to an eco paradise. Now, children today, their generational consciousness with regards to environmentalism is actually quite high. They've grown up in an environment where conversations about global warming and overfishing and plastic pollution and how it affects the oceans and wildlife, it's a very real conversation going on around them. It's not as distant as it was in the past when people thought, people like Greenpeace were eco-terrorists and so forth. these children understand that we need to, in our everyday lives, work to preserve the planet that nurtures us. And in fact, these days, a lot of parents say that the children in their homes are the stronger advocates of changes. The young people are often more willing to make extreme changes and to do more, even if it costs a bit more. And this is particularly for those who are a little older than, very little ones, where the influence of the home has a role to play. But the children are willing to do more in order to preserve the planet. Now, in my story, I'm hoping that children will connect to that love for the planet, or that connection will deepen. Generally, when children are quite young, if they have experiences with nature, like hiking and camping and fishing and so forth, it deepens their empathy for our planet. It makes them more sympathetic. It makes them connect with the earth more. It actually makes them healthier as well. They tend to eat better, and they connect with other human beings. They see them as, fellow inhabitants of this planet. And I know that not all children will have the experience of being immersed in nature. Some children live in the inner city. They probably don't even see a blade of grass for weeks. And the next best thing would be to read about it. So what I'm hoping is that just reading about this and seeing how the children in my story connect with nature and the efforts they are making in order to protect the planet in the small context of the community they live in will have some sort of impact on the readers. And readers, particularly when you're quite young, these things do tend to sink in a little deeper than they do with adults. I mean, I live in Accra, for example, where sometimes, the dichotomy between what adults say and what they actually do is so stark. We have an urban forest. The Achimota forest is actually not too far from where I live. And don't ask me why, but the Urban Forestry Commission thought it was a great idea to clear away parts of the forest in order to build their headquarters there. And I mean, I don't think this is something, yes, so the younger children, I think, will understand that there's something slightly crazy about this, but adults thought it was perfectly fine. So I'm hoping that children will form that connection. And in fact, in the next book, the actual story takes place entirely on this eco-paradise. And I'm hoping that will create a real experience for children. Of course, always second best to experiencing nature, but I mean, that's another story.
Absolutely. And it's a nice for teachers and librarians. I feel like there's a lot of STEM potential there for cross-curricular engagement too, because it's like a very fun and sort of organic way to incorporate some of the more scientific ideas into the language arts. And I sort of love when it can happen naturally like that, and in a way that makes you care about it more deeply than you're just like sitting down and getting facts and taking notes and things like that. So I think, look out for this one, everyone. Next, let's move on to some of the humans in the story. Leading figures in Ato's life are maternal figures, his own mother and Nana. It's such a generational story, powered by the matriarchs and his family. How did you choose to write them?
Yes, that brings it very close to home for me. They say that as a writer, you leave indelible fingerprints of your soul all over the paper, and that is absolutely true for me. Ato's grandmother, with your question, I'm going to focus on Ato's grandmother. She's very strong, she's very loving, she's very warm, and she breeds a sense of self-confidence in Ato. It's lovely to see the developments from him from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. Now, this was largely influenced by my grandmother, and permit me, I've got this up here. That's a picture of my grandmother. That's a picture of my grandmother. She was the only grandmother I had. My parents relocated to Ghana when I was a small child, and the other three grandparents were dead, and she was the only grandmother I had. My parents lived in her home for a good number of years, so I grew up in her house. And my friends had grandmothers who would bake cakes for them, and they would make plantain pudding for them and so forth. I mean, my grandmother, she was a fire-breathing dragon. She was a teacher turned undertaker. I was terrified of her. She drove very fast. She had this tiny mini Morris, it was. And she drove so fast that when she went around the corner, the car would literally tip on 2 wheels. I was so scared of my grandmother. I mean, when she called me, my legs turned to jelly. I thought, oh my God, what had I done? But then I grew up and my fear vanished, and I just developed so much admiration for my grandmother. She was a very strong woman. She had this, I would go see her in her home, and she had this straight back leather yellow armchair. I sit across from her, and we would share stories about her life and people and politics and religion and education and finance and just about everything. And she died about 11 years ago. I was 40 and she was 95. But then I think back, if my grandmother had died when I was a child, my memory of her would have been completely different from the memory I have of her now and the feelings I have of her now, which is just love and admiration and respect. That's what I had. And I wanted in my story for my main character, Atu, to experience at the age of 12 what I had experienced only in my maturity. I mean, it feels so good to have a fire-breathing dragon have your back, you know? And that's what I wanted him to know. I wanted him to feel, you know, Nana is here for me. Nana has my back. I can go to Nana at any time of the day or night, and I know I have this shelter. Nana is there. That's what I wanted for him. And it was the influence of my grandmother that made me present his grandmother that way. Now, his mother is a weaker, more anxious character, and I wrote that largely because I wanted to juxtapose her against the strength of Atu's paternal grandmother.
I love that story. You've written such a tender and humorous exploration of grief, and the symbol of the couch is very powerful. Was there anything in your life that influenced that part of the book?
Yes, again, yes. In this couch, Atu spends, I mentioned before that Atu's mother had told him never sit on that couch, never ever. And initially he would shy away from it, but sometime down the line, he found himself, you know, seated on it, having deep conversations with his grandmother and growing as a result of those conversations. Two things influenced this. Years ago, I read a story about a farmer, I believe in New Mexico, I think it was, who had a beloved truck, and that truck had come to the end of its useful life. I mean, the sensible thing to do was take it to the scrapyard, but this man didn't do that. He chose instead to bury his truck. He dug a hole for it at the bottom of his garden, and he buried his truck. And when he was asked why, he said this truck had served his family for decades. He had taken produce from his farm to the market, lugged his family around, traveled around the country in it, slept in it. It had been like a hotel to him so many years that it was his friend, his companion, his partner, his everything. No, he could not scrap it. He had to bury the truck. Now, when my grandmother died, I went to her home several times, and I'd stand in her living room and I'd look at her empty chair. She had this straight back leather yellow armchair, and I just looked at the empty chair, and it evoked so many memories in me. I remembered all the conversations I shared with her. I remembered the encouragement I got from her. I remember the times we laughed, and I remembered so much. And I understood why this man did not scrap his truck and instead chose to bury it. And in the story, Nana's couch, yes, is a symbol of fear for his mother, trepidation for Atu himself, and for his grandmother. It brings up memories of both joy and sorrow from the past. So, I mean, once you read the book, now you understand why Nana decides to do what she did with her couch.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I think that's all we have time for at the moment. So let's move on to Patrick Ochieng. Patrick is the author of Playing a Dangerous Game, a middle grade novel being published by Norton Young Readers in August of this year. He was longlisted for the Sin City NG 2018 Anthology Prize. He has been published in, oh no, I didn't get pronunciations. I apologize for this. Kikwetu, the Manyori Brittle Paper, and other literary publications. He lives in Kenya with his family. Thanks for joining us today, Patrick.
Thank you.
Will you take some time now to tell our audience about your new book?
Thank you. Thank you. The Playing a Dangerous Game is a coming-of-age novel of coming-of-age of 4 boys, the protagonist, Lumush, and his 3 friends, Odush, Mose, and Dado. And it's also the coming-of-age of a nation, the nation of Kenya. It's set in the 70s, a period when these young boys are about 11 years old. And the nation itself is also about the same age, the nation of Kenya, that is, having gained its independence from the British in 1963. So as these boys are finding their footing in life, the nation of Kenya is also finding its footing. It's set in a railway estate in Nairobi. The railway at that time was the biggest employer. And the protagonist, Lumush's father, works for the railways. And the story is about these 4 young boys doing the normal things that boys their age do, doing all the mischievous stuff, climbing trees, sometimes falling off trees, and doing the normal things kids their age do, while they're also finding their footing in this new nation, which is also finding its footing. Now, the story begins with the protagonist, Lumush's father, having been promoted in the railways. And promotion meant moving to a different estate, different house, and means leaving behind friends. So Lumush doesn't want to move, but the mother is really excited. She's going to have a house with her own compound where she can plant some vegetable. And she believes now Lumush should go to another school. But Lumush doesn't want to leave his friends. He's forced to go to a new school, a posh school, the school where he finds things are strange. He finds all sorts of different things, people who are different. So up to that extent, the story brings in the issue of class. He finds himself being called an interloper in his new school, and he's really trying hard to fit in the new school. But as these boys also play these games within the estate, next to an old car, an old Zephyr car, looming in the distance or looming in the background, there's this house which everybody believes is haunted, a house on Desai Street. It's a house where a white woman died with her daughter, and everybody believes it's haunted, and nobody wants to go there. So these 4 boys in the adventure, they're trying to find out what exactly happens in this haunted house. And they even put their lives at risk to be able to find out what happens. Later on, it turns out that this house is being used as a transit point for stolen coffee from the railway yard. And they solved the mystery in the end. But while all this is going on, there are all these other subtle themes in the background, themes of nationality. They're trying to find out what it means to be a Kenyan. They're trying to relate with the other communities. We have the Asian community at that time in Kenya, who had come to Kenya and the other 3 East African countries to build the railway. And most of these countries were actually built by the railway, in the sense that as the railway passed the different towns, like Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, it spawned the city. And so the railway is the biggest thing within Kenya at that time. And the Asians who came to build the railway stayed. Most of their grandfathers came towards the end of the 19th century, and they built the railway and they stayed and they became citizens. So during this time, at about in 1972, Amin, the dictator in Uganda, expels about 80,000 Asians from Uganda and their citizens. That's about 1% of the population. So these boys are wondering about all these things because they also have Asians within their community in Kenya and in Nairobi, and they're wondering about the relationship because of the lives they lead and this way they segregate themselves. So they are learning all these different things. So that particular theme of nationalism also plays into the book. And at one point, the issue also of patriotism comes in. And Lumush can't understand why, when the flag is raised, the new Kenyan flag, the 4-colored flag, our flag in Kenya has 4 colors. There's red for the blood that was shed during the struggle for independence, black for the people, and green for the land, and white for peace. So he can't understand that why he must stand ramrod straight when the flag is being raised. And these issues of nationalism, and he's told that, no, it means you're patriotic, you must stand straight. And he wonders why. He says you cannot force patriotism, you cannot force this thing, you cannot force somebody to respect something. He even he cracks a joke and says that if you force people to respect this thing, then when you're not looking, they might use the flag to wipe your backside, and then there'll be a 5th color. So these are all issues that are coming in. This is the issue of nationalism. I believe even in the US currently, there is the issue of some people believing that maybe bending a knee while the national anthem is being played is disrespectful. And these young boys were dealing with that during that time in the 70s. So as I said, the book progresses, and they finally find out that this particular house that is supposedly haunted is a go down or a transit point for coffee that has been stolen from the railway yard. But as all this goes on, all those other themes of also class come about. The theme of nationalism, like I said. Then there's the coming of age, both of the nation and the boys themselves. And then there is the issue of even tribalism or ethnicity in our country. That's a big thing. And they're all trying to understand these things. And finally, they solve the mystery of the ghost house, or the so-called ghost house, which turns out to be a transit point. So basically, that is what the book is about.
Oh, goodness. There's a lot going on. That is a very rich background and sense of time and place to be giving to kids. But I think, why did you think it was important for them, for like young readers, to have a story that is dealing with themes like this?
Well, to borrow from our very own Deborah Ahenkorah, Deborah says that children's writing punches stereotypes. It's the best way to punch stereotypes. We have a lot of stereotypes. We talk about, in my country, in Kenya, they say, they are not our people. Why are you hanging around with them? They're not our people. And you find the protagonist telling a girl he's infatuated with that, oh, forget about parents, forget about grown-ups. They make a big deal about small things like where you come from. You see, it's really wise when they make a big issue of little things like where you come from. So some of these themes, like I've heard also Sarah say, are not too deep for children. We think they're deep for these children, but they seem to be able to understand them sometimes even more deeply than us. Like I gave an example of the issue of the flag. Lumush wonders why he is forced to stand ramrod straight and he is forced to respect the flag. He says respect cannot be forced. You see, so they understand all these themes. We think sometimes that, no, they're too young for this kind of things. But I believe that when we allow them a chance to understand these things and explain them to them, sometimes they have even better answers than we do.
Yeah, for sure. kind of on the flip side of dealing with deeper sorts of issues, you've also done such an amazing job of capturing just like a sense of boyhood and adventure and that sort of time in a kid's life. And how did you sort of get into that headspace as a writer to write those moments in your story?
There is a quote by, I think, Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde says that every portrait painted with feeling is a portrait of the painter and not the sitter. Well, I'll not go to that extent like Oscar Wilde believes that. And I believe my sister also, Elizabeth, talked about the indelible part of the soul being left in writing. I'll not go to that extent. However, I know that all fiction has sprinklings of the experiences of the writer. To explain myself, I am a child of the railway, meaning that my father all his life worked for the railway, all his living life worked for the railway. I am also a child of that generation of the railway in the 70s. My father would be transferred. Every time he would be transferred. To get a perspective, the railway was called the East African Railways and Harbors. It traversed 3 countries, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. So one minute my father would be working at the coast in Mombasa, and the next minute he would be transferred, and we'd be moving to Uganda in Jinja. And that meant moving schools, moving house, and so on and so forth. So to that extent, the experiences of these boys, the 4 boys, the protagonists and his 3 friends, are my experiences. But only to that extent. I wouldn't go as far as Oscar Wilde puts it, that's a portrait of the painter and not the sitter. But there's sprinklings of my experience. The second, the second source while writing Playing a Dangerous Game is from my reading. When we talk about experiences, I read a lot. I like classics like Mark Twain's Tom Sawyer. I love Tom. I love the way he plays tricks on his Aunt Polly, and is infatuated with Amy and Becky, and I love Huckleberry Finn. One of the, in fact, the character Huck is such a serious character that Mark Twain saw that fit to write a book specifically for that particular character, Huckleberry Finn. So I draw some of those experiences from some of those classics. But closer home, the books like the Moses series, written by a very talented writer, Barbara Kimenyi. The Moses series is about school life, boarding school life. I love characters like Itchy Fingers and King Kong. And so I draw from that second source, which is the stories I heard told by my parents and people close to me, and also my reading. But there's the third source, which is writers, every writer uses, which is my imagination. And the imagination obviously is influenced by the first 2 sources of the experience and reading. So partly what I write about these boys are my experiences, because I grew up in a railway estate. I know the setting in the railway estate. I changed schools often. I had to leave friends behind, and so on and so forth.
Thank you so much. I think that's all we have time for. I really appreciate everything you had to say, and I'm very much looking forward to your book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. So that is going to bring us to Ruby Yayra Goka. She is a dentist and a writer from Ghana. Her book, Even When Your Voice Shakes, is a novel for teens that will be published by Norton Young Readers in February 2022. 6 of her young adult books have won awards in the Burt Award competition for African literature in Ghana. She lives in Accra. All right. Let's get, do we have Ruby?
Yes, hi.
There you are. Hello. Welcome. I would love for you to just take a few minutes here to introduce your new book.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. So even when your voice shakes is the story of 16-year-old Amelie. She's the first of 4 daughters. And when we meet her, her family is on the verge of being evicted from the 2-bedroom apartments they share. And her mom lost a baby 6 months before we meet them. And her mom is either depressed or she's just given up hope, we can't tell. And her dad was so disappointed that the baby was stillborn and that the baby was another daughter that he just up and left. So it's fallen onto Amelie to take care of her younger sisters and to practically, take on the job of parenting her younger sisters. So eventually they do get the money to settle the rent for a few more months. But then a long lost relative she didn't even know she had steps in and offers to have Amelie as her house help. So Amelie moves from this community that is still in the capital to a different part of Accra, the capital of Ghana. And then once there, she gets all these new experiences. That's to save money because she eventually wants to become a seamstress, and her benefactor has agreed to send her to a fashion design school. So her sisters are being taken care of now. Her mother has been given capital to start a business. Amelie herself is saving money for her future, and things are looking good for her. And then out of nowhere, she suffers some sexual and physical abuse. And it's as if everything she's worked hard for, she doesn't know what to do. Does she speak up? Because if she speaks up, then all those benefits disappear. And who is going to believe her? She's just this young girl from one of the poorer parts of the capital. No one is going to believe her. These are big and powerful, this is a big and powerful family. So what does she do? But then by the end of the story, she finds her voice and she does speak up about the abuse. And then through that, other girls who have suffered similar instances also speak up. And then that wave is like the Me Too movement. It just grows and grows. So in writing this book, what I'm mostly hoping for is to get young people to begin talking about these things, because in Ghana, sexual abuse or domestic violence or whatever type of violence is a common thing, and it is perpetrated sometimes against children. But then, like Elizabeth was saying earlier, children are to be seen and not heard, and not heard. Like you're supposed to obey the adult figures in your life. You can't speak back. Sometimes you can't even look them in the face when they're speaking to you. So she's coming almost from a place of no power. She gets her power and then she speaks up. So I'm hoping that these will spark these topics of conversations around people in that age group for us to begin speaking out from a younger age. Thank you.
Wow, yes, thank you. So sort of staying on that topic, with the sexual violence and whatnot, would you say that your novel reflects or challenges Ghana's national conversation about this topic?
I think it's one of those things that happen and we don't talk about because there's still so much stigma associated with it, especially if it's perpetrated against children or against women. Why was she out at that time of the night? Why was she wearing that skirt? Any good or decent girl would be home by this time. She probably brought it on by herself by going here or by drinking there. It's always victim blaming and victim shaming. usually stories come out, even if it's perpetrated against young children who don't know anything. It's always find a way to put it on the female figure. Where was her mother? Her mother is supposed to be looking after her, and it's almost as if the perpetrators, no one blames them for it. And when or if these cases do get reported, then there's always it's almost as if we've formed a society against taking these things to the higher courts of the land, and always, oh, let's go and settle it in this, let's go and settle it at home. The next thing you know, the perpetrator is still in the community, but then the survivor of the assault has been sent somewhere, so there's still a lot of shame and stigma associated around it. And I'm hoping that by this book, and there are lots of other agencies now, people are speaking up more because of social media and all this. So people are finding their voices and people are speaking up. But then I'm hoping we can get younger people to begin speaking up, so that if something happens at school you're not comfortable with, or someone a little older does something, you have the voice, you speak up, and people support you in this. Like both my co-authors were saying, our society is a bit different. It takes a lot of courage for anyone who survives this type of abuse. It will take a lot of courage to speak up. But to be a minor and to be a female and to come from this part of the world, it takes, I don't know, even more courage. And I'm hoping that by this, we would, on one hand, be educating both males and females and anyone else in that gender spectrum, that it's not right. And if you do something like that, people will speak up and they will get you.
Moving on to sort of the role of motherhood, because that plays a strong part in this book. Can you talk about this aspect of family and why it was important for you to include and how you chose to represent it?
Okay, so to start off, it really wasn't a conscious decision to portray the mothers in the various ways that were portrayed in the book. What I really wanted to show is something that happens quite often, again, in our parts of the world, where a younger sibling is automatically put in charge of an older sibling is put in charge of all her younger siblings. And I feel children don't really have the opportunity to just be children and to enjoy their childhoods. So from an early age, some children would have to help with the upkeep of their families because of the situations that they were born into. And in this instance, there's a bit of a role reversal, because Ameli's mother has just given up. Her father is nowhere to be found. So the burden falls on Ameli. She could have done as her father and left the house and gone somewhere else, but then she takes up that parental role and she steps in and fills the gap for her sisters. So in effect, she doesn't want them to go through what she is going through. So for the mothering aspect, I would say it's more of Ameli taking that up instead of what her mother should have been doing. And if you juxtapose what Ameli's mother and Auntie Rosina, the benefactor she went to live with, you'll see that yes, they are both mothers, but then they go about parenting and mothering in entirely different. And even Ameli in this instance is also a mother to her little sister. So they'll go about that mothering in a totally different way. And who's to say which one is right and which one is wrong?
Yes, for sure. There are a lot of big topics happening in this book, which is often true in YA. I think there are a lot of big issues that teens are encountering, often for the first time. They're sort of made aware of the largeness of the world and sort of stepping into that. But how did you sort of adapt it for your younger readers? How did you talk about those things, or what else did you include to sort of balance the big talking points that were going to be included?
Okay, so I have to say a big thank you to Sarah, who helped me with the editing, because I'm sure my very first draft was very graphic, or more graphic than what you find now. But then again, I think even though we as adults like to pretend that young people don't know what's happening in the world, they are very much abreast with issues that are going on. So we might think that this is very heavy for a child to deal with, but then there are so many of them who have who have been forced to grow and who are dealing with situations like that, you know. So I think it's been made in an age appropriate way, but then I won't be surprised if you did a survey and found out that more than half of the young adults you surveyed have either know someone or have personally been through a situation like that. Because from just even listening to the news on TV, on radio, there are all these stories nowadays, and kids are everywhere, young adults are everywhere. They're on all these social media platforms, you know. So there's no way that these things are happening and they have no idea about it. It could be, yes, they know it's happening, but then it's not entered into their little bubble. So it doesn't affect them deeply. But then I'm very sure at least every young adult knows of or has been through, knows of someone who has been through or has experienced something like this before. So I don't think it's so far away from them. I think it's quite closer than we think.
Yes. Sarah, did you have something you wanted to add?
I did actually, because I think, Ruby, something that's so wonderful about your book is the way in which you balance the themes of the book, as you've been describing, with the importance of friendship, support, love, and that is, in a way, that's the real hope at the heart of the book, isn't it? Do you think that that's an important element of the story for you? Because as a reader, I feel that that's a very important element of the story for me.
Yes, yes. So again, you don't want to take away that sense of hope, you know, that maybe the perpetrators got away with their crime. Then really, what's the point of me going through all the stigma coming out, you know, all the shame associated with it? So yes, we did want to create that, we did want to have an element of hope, you know, of hopefulness or of rightness, you know, that she took this chance and then things were set right. That might not always be true in the real world, but then I think for our young readers, that was really important, because they are just setting off. They don't have all what should I say? They're not as critical of the world as we are, you know. So it was really important to let that element of hope be in the story, that yes, sometimes bad things happen to good people, but the bad people get punished.
Yes, it is for sure. And I think that element of hope is one of the core tenets sort of children's literature, running through most of the stories, and something that makes it so wonderful, and the various ways in which that manifests, and the fact that it is true of books being published in Africa, and it's true of books being published here. And it's sort of a uniting force, which is great to see. I think we only have time for about one more question with everyone here. It's been so great talking with everybody. Let's just, what does everyone hope that, like, the Accord titles are going to bring to the American audience? And anyone can just jump in.
I'll take that first, and I'll take it quickly. I think the thing that's so striking, listening to everybody talking, and it's what it's been a big part of my involvement in this, is the sort of sense of commonality, that the themes and concerns and experiences that these novels address in different ways are universal. They belong to everybody, to children coming of age anywhere, and yet at the same time, they're very specific to the writer's own experience in the place they live or the place they work or whatever. And I love that sense of both the universal and the particular here. And that's what, you know, I'm hoping to bring, is that sense of a shared and diverse world at the same time.
Oh, that's lovely. It's absolutely, I think, our feelings about working on the titles as well, and knowing, you know, Deborah and I know that what we want to do is show that an African experience is as varied as everybody else's experience, but it's rooted in something very specific and particular in each country, and each author's experience is their own. And it's just joyful and wonderful to get an opportunity to peek into people's lives and realize what we share, and also learn about one another. It's absolutely about the best thing that literature can give us as readers, I think.
Yeah, and I think the ability to form friendships through the books that you love as a young reader, to have characters who become your friends during a tough time, a lonely time, a happy time, and those characters happen to be African, I think is something that I would love for us to be able to achieve.
Okay, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, everyone. I just have a few final book list housekeeping notes here. This has been a really wonderful discussion, and we were so thrilled to speak to all of you today. You can learn more about Accord Literary and find Norton Young Readers resources through these links, which can be found in your slide deck and will be included in the follow-up materials sent by Booklist tomorrow. Along with the resource list, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, title list, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones, like those you see here. You can still register for ALA's virtual conference and an exhibition taking place between June 23rd and 29th. This year's conference will feature amazing speakers, including President Barack Obama, educational programming, and an opportunity to connect with colleagues and librarians everywhere. Visit 2021.alaannual.org for more information. And if you are not yet a subscriber of Booklist, pair the page-by-page reading experience of print with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com and lock in print, online, digital, and archive access by taking advantage of this special webinar offer to get Booklist for only $75. While you're perusing Booklist Online, be sure to check out Book Links, a quarterly supplement to Booklist perfect for educators and school librarians. It is now freely available to all. To start reading, type booklinks.booklistonline.com into your web browser. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and one more thank you to our sponsor, Norton Young Readers. This concludes today's webinar.